Program started. The first stop on our West Coast tour here for Brew Talks. Thank you guys for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new startups here, and it's quite the turnout tonight, so thank you all for coming. I'm Chris Fernari. I'm the editor of Brewbound.com. We're published by BevNet, leading beverage media publication in the non-alcoholic world, and we're trying our hand at this craft beer thing like many of you. So we've been around for a few years now, and as part of an extension of our semi-annual business conference that we host twice a year, one in San Diego coming up on December 5th, and one on the East Coast, we decided to do some free networking events, and that's what you guys are at today, obviously. I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't call out some of our sponsors that allow this to be free. You can see them on the banner here. Two specifically have actually made the trip and come out to the event tonight. Brian from Crown, our presenting sponsor, and Roger from Wild Goose Canning. Thank you guys for coming. It's great to see you here. So our first panel here, let's just give a round of applause because, right? I mean, why not? Our first panel here, we have a few breweries that have, one recently just got off the ground, one still in the planning process, and a guy up here, Shawn from Coronado, that's been involved in one brewery launched back in the 90s and recently a production facility for Coronado. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce our panelists right now. Jacob over here, you might know him from his days at Stone as the communication coordinator, or more recently as the founder of Modern Times Beer. Just launched a couple weeks ago here in San Diego. One of the largest, most successful Kickstarter fundraising campaigns, over $50,000 raised on Kickstarter, and about $1 million raised overall, about, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Something like that.
I mentioned Shawn. Shawn is, as many of you know, the outgoing president of the San Diego Brewers Guild, the sort of the lead point person for brewery operations at Coronado, and he'll be transitioning into more of a regional sales manager role and ambassador role for Coronado. And Jeff Bagby, we were trying to figure out earlier how many GABF medals this guy has won. I think 3-time, 3 in a row Brew Pub of the Year, multiple GABF award-winning beers, and now starting his own project, the Bagby Beer Company. So how about a round of applause for our panelists here. So for our viewers in the audience, and we're also live streaming this, our viewers at home, if you guys have any questions, feel free to tweet them with the hashtag BrewTalks. I'll get them up here on my computer. I have a filter going on Twitter. I'll see some of your questions, and I'll do my best to ask our panelists. One final big, huge shout out to the Lost Abbey for hosting us tonight. Without these guys, this event wouldn't be possible. And thank you for the free first beer. So, all right, guys, you just launched a brewery. You're launching a brewery. You've been involved in launching a brewery. I'll start with Jacob. I'm going to ask each of you this one question. What is one thing that you wish you knew as you were opening your brewery that you didn't know? The most important thing.
I guess the answer would be that everything, I mean, you don't celebrate the minor victories. You know, you think maybe going into it like, oh, I've overcome this hurdle, now I'm just, this is really awesome. I'll sort of celebrate and then move on to the next thing. It's like, for me, the process just continued as uninterrupted, climbing one hurdle after another until we finally were selling beer, and that was kind of my moment of relief. So, despite it being 18 months long, it still isn't even quite at the point where I'm like, all right, we've started the brewery,
Right. Now, Shawn, you have a little bit different perspective, I'm sure, having launched a brewery in the 90s and recently gone through, a production facility expansion at Coronado. Is there something that you can pick out from, both of those time periods that you said, I wish we knew it in the 90s, and, maybe we fixed it the second time around?
Just shout.
We might be muted. If you want to pull it out, there's a little button on top there. There we go. Shawn was in the bathroom right before this, so...
Does that sound right? Oh, beautiful. Excellent. So I would say when we first opened, if I would have known that we needed more money, we would have gotten more money. Seems obvious, but for us, when we opened up Coronado Brewing Company, it was a race. We had another group in Coronado that was trying to open up a brewery, and so it was a race to who got the money first and open up their brewery. So I would say if you plan to open up a brewery, whatever money you think you need, add a little bit on that. And I mean add a lot on that. It always seems to go over budget. For the last, our production facility, that one was a lot easier, being that you had already 15 years under our belt. There was equity built up, there's a history. It was a lot easier on the second run. So I would say if you're planning to open up a brewery for the first time, have a lot of money ready to go.
Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, I would say mine was more of a realization that, I'll keep it quick, there's no one out there that's going to care as much about your brewery and it getting open than you. And as soon as you realize that, you realize that that relates to every single thing that you're doing. And that's how you move forward. That's the only way you move forward.
So you touched on it a little bit, the money sort of piece of the ginormous puzzle that is starting a brewery. Probably the most important piece, as you alluded to. How do you arrive at your figure? Jacob, I mean, it was $1 million or so for you. I mean, at what point are you sitting down, looking at the computer, saying, here's the number that I need to get to? You know, how do you get to your figure?
Well, it involved a lot of planning. I mean, I wrote a really extensive business plan and tried to price everything out and contact the various vendors and suppliers that I'd work with on things. But there's definitely a little bit of art to it. You know, it's sort of like, well, I think this is about how much I need, and then I'll just round it up to the next big number that seems like a good amount. And it's also a bit of a marketing question because you've got to raise that amount of money unless you have, in my case, $1.25 million sitting around. So one of the things that kind of caught me by surprise was, actually not asking for a ton of money can make it a harder sell in some ways to investors. A lot of people ask me, like, how could you possibly start a brewery for less than $10 million? And so $1.25 million sounded to them like it wouldn't be enough, and that to them made it sound like a riskier investment. So yeah, it's kind of,
Interesting, not asking for enough. Shawn, what about
you? Yeah, so for us, it was very much about doing the due diligence, knowing what you needed. Now, when we first opened up, we were only going to be a brew pub. That's all we were when we started. So we didn't need package equipment. We didn't need a lot of kegs. We knew we needed brewery equipment, and we knew we needed restaurant tables and chairs and everything that supports a restaurant. So we actually sold shares to friends and family for $1 a share. And it wasn't difficult to sell, believe it or not. I guess your family believes in you more than people you don't know. And when we first opened up the brewery, we actually had a tough time making the first payroll. And so all of us founding partners actually had to take a cash advance on our credit cards. And I'm 25. Taking $10,000 cash advance on my credit card was quite scary. And I thought to myself, is this it? Because there's not another credit card. So if we don't make payroll 2, it's game over. And I'm sitting here, so we made payroll 2, and it's full steam ahead right now. I got to say, it's unbelievable. I cannot believe what's going on with the craft beer business here in San Diego.
Definitely. Now, Jeff, you are still in the process of getting off the ground. Have you found all your investors?
No, we've not.
And how are you going about pitching them and convincing them to invest in the Bagby Beer Company? You just kind of hang the medals in front of them and?
No, not at all. Our plan has evolved and changed as we've gone through the process, and our number evolved with that. We didn't want to go to investors not knowing where we were going to be, what we were going to be able to do, and go to say, hey, we think we're going to open with this many square feet and we're going to be able to make this many barrels of beer. No, we wanted that location. We wanted to know exactly how much it was going to cost for rent. if there was triple net, if there was insurance, if there was other fees, everything that was associated with the location. Then we kind of worked backwards and went into, we're building a ginormous restaurant as well. What goes into all that? So we spent hours, days, months. I think it probably took us, maybe like a year to get to our number, or at least our goal. And it's something that we also built in, is that we have the ability with the site that we have to phase in the project. We don't have to open full bore when we go. So as we're going and our architect's designing and we're still fundraising and everything is still moving, but that was the best way that we could put our project together while also bringing our idea and our concepts to investors or potential investors to say, here, come walk the site with us. This is what this is going to eventually be. This is what this is going to be. And then we also took, thankfully, so many of our friends' information in the industry who, actuals, what they spent, what they thought they were going to spend, what they projected, and how they actually turned out. And we used a lot of that information. I mean, pages and pages of numbers and P&Ls and, they had this much square footage, but their menu was this way, so they didn't turn tables as fast as we could turn tables because we're going to do this. Just as much information as we could. And we looked from the budget from the back end and the front end. We looked at our projections and went, is that a realistic number to hit on a Tuesday lunch? Right. And then worked backwards. Just every single thing we do. Is that realistic to make that many barrels in a week, in a month, in a year, in the first 3, 4, 5 years? Just every different angle that we can look at. And we still know we got it wrong. There's one absolute thing that you will certainly know about your business plan is it will be wrong.
Interesting. Now, you sort of had the luxury of a site to be able to take your investors to. That might not always be the case for some of these breweries.
And it wasn't the case with some of our early investors either.
Right. Jacob, how about for you? I mean, did you have your site picked out? Were you ready to go? You seem like you got a pretty successful investing round. So how were you able to push people over the edge and get them to invest in modern times?
I did less of the kind of thing that Jeff just talked about, partially because most of my potential investors and then the people who ended up becoming my investors were generally not beer savvy people. They were not familiar with what went into a craft brewery. And so I did do a lot of that, and I was surprised that very few people read it closely. They were far more interested in my ability to manage a business, like a generic business, rather than a brewery, than they were in the quality of my projections. Most of the truly savvy investors knew that the projections were all bullshit anyway, and they just cared about whether or not I was a trustworthy, competent manager and someone who had the vision and ambition to make this thing happen, whether it was a bubble bath soap factory or a brewery or anything. That was more of their focus. So I refined my pitch to focus more on that as I went through the horrible fundraising process.
So sort of trial and error through the first few investment asks, or did you stand in front of the mirror and recite your lines?
No, I mean I set up a couple of early pitches for people who either knew weren't going to be investors or were going to give me really rigorous, honest feedback before I went into actually pitching investors.
Right. So that brings up an interesting, talking point here is sort of finding those first round investors and even getting those first two that you might know you're going to strike out on, but just to refine your pitch. How did you begin that process of selecting them and actually finding them to begin with?
We cast a very wide net, but because we were raising over $1 million, we were limited by SEC rules to individuals that are qualified investors, meaning people who have high net worth and high income. And so, going through your personal Rolodex, how many of your friends are worth over $1 million or make over $400,000 a year. And so that immediately eliminates, pretty much everyone that I know. And so it became just a matter of kind of figuring out who would qualify and then creating a priority list within the qualification group and then sort of working through that.
Right. Shawn, what about you guys? I mean, you did it friends and family back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Probably had a little easier time the second time around with bank loans, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, what was that process like for you guys doing friends and family and really working from there?
Well, growing up in Coronado, there's definitely a little bit of money in Coronado, and so it was easy to sell the family. And then the friends was a little tougher sell, but also the fact that there was a lot of loose money going around. Yeah, we ended up raising we started off with 1.5 million, and still we barely got going with that. And so for us, there wasn't an issue. It was a race, more or less. It was just, are we going to beat the other team to get Coronado Brewing Company open up first? Because we knew there was only really enough room for one brewery. I know at one point Carl Strauss had mentioned back in the late 90s that they might be looking at Coronado as an option, and we thought that would be silly because now we're cutting up the pie literally in half, and well, we didn't think that'd be wise. We're happy they didn't make that decision because we were going to defend, but so it wasn't that difficult in the beginning. And the second one was a lot easier because you already have equity. It's we like owning the property, our properties stand on, and our businesses stand on, and so it's a lot easier to raise money. And once you have a track record, it's easy.
Sure. So, Jeff, I'll ask you, what are you guys doing to push these investors over the edge? Is it really the numbers, or are they seeing your vision? What's the most important piece when you're talking to these guys and saying, is it really the bottom line for them, or is it the creative vision?
Wow. I could talk on this subject probably all day, and I'm not even fully qualified to do so. To start with, what Jacob started to bring up is talking about finding an attorney and knowing what your company structure is and knowing how you can actually legally raise money is key. I wouldn't start talking to anyone until you know what you can and can't do. In our situation, we have all walks of life of investors. We've often talked about how different they are, but how similar they are. We have people that are just extremely passionate about beer who have known what I've done or heard about our project on some way and actually have come to us. One of the conditions of how we are legally allowed to fundraise is I can't publicly post anything or come and say, hey, check us out, we need money. You have to be very careful with who you approach and how you approach them, or at least we do, the way our company's set up. So, every single one and every single, call it a pitch, has been different. We typically set up a meeting, we give them some high-level information about the entire project. If they want to see the site, we'll take them to the site. If we want to just go have a couple beers and talk about it, we do that. Some of them get very, very into the numbers and the details in the numbers. Some of them want to know what kind of food we're going to serve and what kind of color the walls are going to be. I mean, it's all walks of life, and you can never know what someone's going to ask you. And over time, we've gotten better and better at responding to those questions and kind of, I don't want to sell anybody into investing in me. If they don't believe in my passion and what my wife and I are going to do, then I don't want them as an investor.
Right.
I don't want them sitting at my bar going, hey, what's going on with this and what's going on with that? I want them hands off going, you know what, I believe in them, they're going to kick ass and they're going to sell a lot of beer.
Right.
So I can't give you an answer. It's it's specific to the person and the individual or the group or the family or whoever is your potential.
So you really got to know who you're talking to when you're talking to these investors.
It really does help, and we found that the best way is we literally sit down with them, we invite them out for a beer, and we just start discussing their intentions or their interest and our project and what we're going to do. And if it goes on from there, it does, then they get the 136-page wampum document excuse me, goes through all the legal stuff. It's boring as hell, but they get that after. But we preface them for that. We say, hey, okay, great, you're moving on. And some people don't move on. So it's situational.
So I want to transition gears here and sort of help move our way into our next panel coming up here in the next few minutes. launching a brewery in San Diego, to me, seems crazy. A new brewery at this point. There is...
Not crazy.
There, and I know you guys will debate me on this. There's 70-something facilities. There's obviously probably about 50 or so craft breweries in San Diego. I think another 40 or so are trying to launch here in San Diego. Obviously, San Diego is regarded as one of the best, craft beer cities in the entire country. There have to be some concerns about all the competition around you launching a brand new brand here. So I don't know, maybe enlighten us and speak to some of the concerns of launching your brewery in such a competitive environment.
First, I'd say I don't think there's stiff competition in San Diego right now. I see every time I go out to a new beer bar or I go out somewhere else, there's a new brewery on tap that I haven't heard of, and then I go to the next bar and it's on tap again. I don't see, I know that when you get into finite numbers and you're trying to sell, thousands and thousands of barrels in San Diego, which is a very small population of those 70 or whatever licenses we're at this point. I see people getting handles, not having an issue with it. I see the beers out there. I see them at multiple locations. I think this city is huge, and we have not even tipped the iceberg on all of the craft beer drinkers that are out there. I think we have an extremely long way to go, and there's plenty of room. If you live in San Diego and you're thinking of opening a brewery and you're worried about the competition, then you should stop right now.
Really?
I don't think there's any competition, so, that's where I'm at.
Any of you guys think differently?
Well, I think the numbers require a little context, right? So the business model for new breweries has changed dramatically over the last few years, and a huge portion of those new breweries are essentially just tasting rooms with brewing systems in them. That is not something that existed a decade ago, and so when you look at it, the absolute number is actually less significant than the total capacity of those breweries, right? So having 1,000 breweries each making one barrel, the number of breweries doesn't tell you a whole lot. It's about how much total quantity there is in the marketplace.
Sure.
But yeah, the other thing is that a marketplace is saturated when people start going out of business because they're not able to perform well enough, right? And that currently isn't happening. You can still succeed and not make outstanding beer.
I don't know any existing breweries in town that are decreasing their capacity.
Right.
They're all increasing their capacity. They're all buying new real estate, new systems, bigger tanks.
Sure, and I would offer to you guys on that point that a lot of those existing breweries are looking elsewhere for their volumes. Just today you have, or in the last couple of days, you have Green Flash saying that they're going to be a national brand before the end of the year. So while they might have 100,000 barrels at their disposal in San Diego, a lot of that is going to be shipped to the East Coast or all around the U.S. Stone entering more territories. Ballast Point entering more territories. Coronado, I know you guys are entering more territories. There are a lot of existing brands that are looking elsewhere to fill that volume.
Sure.
So,
but what percentage of wine is consumed in Napa Valley? San Diego is a little bit of a special case in that regard, where we have built an industry that is really designed to not just supply local demand, but to go elsewhere. There's definitely a national reputation for San Diego breweries that's well earned, and that's part of what makes that business model possible. But nonetheless, you go around to all those breweries, they will all tell you they're selling the greatest proportion of their beer locally.
This is still not all those breweries.
Well, I'd say most of them are selling the greatest proportion locally, and that is the foundation of their business.
So one final question for each of you before we bring up our next panel. Sort of builds on the last question. As a startup with a lot of breweries around town, how do you differentiate yourselves, and how do you really become a local brand and build a local following and a local customer base with so many other reputable breweries around you? And why don't we start with Shawn?
Yeah, okay.
We haven't heard your voice in a while.
Yeah, I'm quiet. You guys are taking all my thunder. I like that, though. That's good. So I look at it two different ways. For Coronado Brewing Company, it's fairly simple. Obviously, our location is ideal. All of us who started Coronado Brewing Company were Coronado graduates, so there's a lot of locals that dig what's going on in Coronado. But it's very simple. Serve hot food hot, cold food cold, give good service, and make good beer. So if we can keep those 4 things going in Coronado, then we'll be just fine. Now with the tasting room, it's a matter of being consistent with what we're doing with our cores and keeping the specialty beers exciting and unique. It does seem like these days people like to know what's the latest and greatest beer you've got going on. And so it puts a strain on the core beers, but we understand that. So just make sure that you brew fun, exciting specialty beers. We just brewed one called the Sock Knocker. And actually one of the guys that came up with the beers, he's standing right over there. He'd be shy for me to call him out, but he's got the glasses. He's standing up over there. Danny Drain. Danny came up with Sock Knocker along with one of our other brewers, Pete Folletta. And we can't, our problem is that we don't have enough hops for that beer. You know, it's all Amarillo and Simcoe. So if we had enough hops, we could brew that beer more often, but we don't, and so be it. So you enjoy it while you can, but I gotta tell you, it's beers like that that I think will keep us going in the right direction with production.
Jacob, what is it for you? What differentiates Modern Times from everyone else?
Well, I mean, we've had very little time to show anybody what we're about. We've been selling beers as our 4th week, so I don't think we've necessarily had the opportunity to create a lot of differentiation. But you know, in the lead up to opening, we did a lot of things differently. But I think the thing that tied it together was that it wasn't calculated to make us different. It was just sort of an expression of my personality and my interests and my passion for the industry, rather than kind of a focus group version of, you know, how to differentiate a brand. I didn't go to business school, you know, I don't know how to do that. I couldn't, you know, write the book on it. I just used it saw it as a canvas and an opportunity to like express my weirdness to a larger group of people, and so far so good.
And Jeff, what's going to make Bagby beer different when it launches?
How long do you have? No, I'm kidding. There's a multitude of things that I believe are going to differentiate us from the rest of the pack, but I would say, you know, to make it short, in moving forward, there's, to borrow 3 words from a friend of mine who spoke in DC at the Craft Brewers Conference, and to add 1 word to it, I'd say you need experience, you need creativity, and you need knowledge, but you also need professionalism. Those 4 things are going to differentiate you, because we're all brewers, basically a bunch of geeks, and we all like different things in weird ways. That's going to differentiate you from anybody, no matter what you do. But you add those 4 components and you have them, those are really key. So anybody who's starting, who doesn't believe that they have those 4 components as a part of their project should go and find those, or hire those, or get them, or learn them, and move on.
Awesome. Well, that's a nice little segue for our next panel coming up here. These guys will be around for a little bit after having beers, so pick their brain. They just went through the process, and they have a lot of experience in Shawn's case, dealing with a lot of small startups, so pick their brains. And we got a little transition period here with the mics, so if you guys are empty and need a beer, selling pints back there, we're going to get the next panel up here in just a couple minutes. So thank you guys.